When I started developing this series on identity pressures and opportunities at different ages, I almost didn't include 50. Not because it's not important, but because it felt too obvious. We all know that 50 is a milestone. It's wrapped in cultural significance, often marked with a big celebration, and it tends to trigger reflection whether we ask for it or not. But then this summer, I found myself in conversation after conversation with friends, colleagues, and clients who had just turned or were about to turn 50 ish. And what struck me was not just the volume of these conversations, but their intensity. There was a real mix of emotions. Some people were energized and clear, others quietly unsettled, and some were questioning everything. And I realized this milestone isn't just about celebrating what's come before, it's about deciding how you want to live the decades ahead. I want to talk to two particular groups of people today, though you might find yourself somewhere in between. First, there are those who feel like they're playing catch up. Maybe you've had an unexpected setback, a business venture that didn't pan out, a divorce that reshaped your finances, or career moves that didn't yield the return you expected. You're looking at your 50s, perhaps with a sense of urgency and college tuition bills, knowing there's still time, but feeling like the margin for error has shrunk. And then there's the other group, those with significant financial freedom. You've built wealth, you have options, you could make a pivot tomorrow if you wanted to. But that abundance comes with its own challenge. You're faced with so many possibilities that you're not sure which path, if any, you want to take. Both realities can leave you feeling uncertain, and both deserve a thoughtful, strategic approach. At 50, some people feel like they're running out of time, and others feel like they have too many options, and both can be paralyzing. So, what do you do if you feel like you're behind or overwhelmed with choices? If you're in catch up mode, set one clear 24-month target. Like, how much do you need to earn, save, rebuild, and reverse engineer the steps? And if you're in freedom mode, lucky you, write down your non negotiables, the values and ways of living you won't compromise, and use those as filters. Both approaches create clarity, which is what unlocks confidence at this stage. 50 is a unique convergence point. You've lived long enough to have a track record, to know your strengths, your preferences, your patterns. You've also lived long enough to see that time really does pass quickly and that certain doors won't stay open forever. You might be at your peak earning years, or you might be navigating how to regain stability. Your personal life may be in a season of expansion or contraction, children leaving home, parents needing more care, relationships shifting. And while all of this is happening, the broader world is moving fast. Industries evolving, technology reshaping work, global events influencing markets and stability. It's no wonder that this age can feel like standing at the intersection of possibility and pressure. For many, 50 is also the first time you really take stock of your past decisions in a comprehensive way. You can look back at your 20s and 30s and see the risks you took, the opportunities you seized, the ones you missed. You can see how certain choices about career, family, health, and money have compounded over time. And this reflection can be clarifying, but it can also stir up regret or self doubt. At 50, it's easy to get stuck in a swirl of what ifs. What if I'd left earlier? What if I'd stayed longer? What if I'd taken that other job or invested sooner? But those what ifs don't have to trap you. So, what do you do with them? First, write down 6 domains: career, relationships, health, finances, personal growth, and contribution. And then, next, for each, think about your ideal state and assess where you are today. Mark each as aligned, off track, or opportunity. And then choose one domain to take action on in the next 12 months. The truth is, those what if questions don't serve you unless you use them as a tool for insight rather than self punishment. The goal is to extract the lessons without getting trapped in the loop. I have my coaching clients who are navigating a season of change do a version of this exercise. And it seems straightforward at first, but there is always an aha, I never thought of it that way. Or, wow, what I need to work on is staring me in the face, but I never had the words or the insight to call it out. This shifts the focus from what I should have done to what I can do next. Of course, where you stand financially plays a huge role in how you see your options at 50. If you're in catch up mode, your decisions may feel more urgent. You may be thinking about income generation in the short term and how to structure your work for maximum return, or how to invest wisely to close the gap. At 50, if you feel like you're behind financially, every decision can feel high stakes. That's why you need a focused target. So, how do you create clarity when the stakes feel so high? First, pick one clear number: how much you need by when. Next, break it into short term bridge moves: consulting, side projects, renegotiating your role. Then, reverse engineer the path from there. In these cases, clarity comes from setting a focused target, knowing exactly how much you need and by when, and then reverse engineering the steps. And if you're in the fortunate position of financial freedom, the challenge can be entirely different. What feels like almost unlimited options can actually create a kind of decision fatigue where every possibility competes for your attention, but none feels urgent enough to act on. At 50, financial freedom is a gift, and one that you've probably worked very hard to earn. But it can also be paralyzing when every option looks possible. So, how do you create clarity when you have too many choices? First, write down 10 possibilities. Next, cross out 7. And then let your top 3 compete for your focus, and then choose one. In that case, the key is to identify your non negotiables, the values, experiences, and ways of living you won't compromise on, and let those act as a filter. Abundance without boundaries leads to paralysis. Abundance with some constraints actually creates freedom. All of this brings us to identity. At 50, many people find themselves needing to reframe who they are beyond their primary roles. If your identity has been rooted in your career, your title, the prestige of your company name, what happens if you step back or shift direction? If it's been tied to parenting, what happens when your children no longer need you in the same way or leave the nest? If it's been built on achievement, what happens when the next mountain isn't as clear? At 50, the biggest identity question isn't about your title or your role. It's who are you when those roles shift? So, how do you rediscover identity when old roles fade? First, list 3 favorite chapters of your life, and then ask what skill, value, or joy runs through all of them. That's your through line, your core identity that you can carry forward. Anchor on that through line, the theme that has run consistently through your life, regardless of job title, location, or season. Once you know your through line, you can explore ways to express it that fit your current season, rather than clinging to past structures that no longer serve you. Legacy also starts to take on new meaning at this stage, and I don't just mean the financial kind. Legacy is about the mark you want to leave on people, on communities, on your industry, on the world. It's about contribution, impact, and influence. Thinking about legacy can be energizing, but it can also be daunting if you feel like you haven't started or if you're not sure what form it should take. At 50, legacy starts to shift. It's less about titles and more about the impact. So, how do you start building legacy now? First, choose one small action: mentor, volunteer, or launch a project. Next, test it for fit and energy. And then let those small steps grow into your unique legacy. The good news is you don't have to have the full blueprint now. You can start experimenting. And then there's reinvention. There's a cultural narrative that reinvention means burning it all down, leaving your job, moving to a new city, starting over completely. And perhaps for some, that might be the right move. But for many, and probably most, especially at 50-ish, a more strategic reinvention makes sense. One that builds on your existing capital, financial, relational, intellectual, and minimizes unnecessary risk. This might look more like shifting your role within your current industry, layering on a new venture alongside your existing work, or repackaging your expertise in a way that opens new opportunities. The point is, you can reinvent without erasing. And the more you approach it as an evolution rather than a rupture, the more likely you are to sustain the change. Connection is another area where clarity at 50 can make all the difference. It's surprisingly easy to feel disconnected at this age, even with a large network. Social media keeps you superficially aware of people's lives, but it doesn't replace the depth of real, consistent connection. And without that, it's easy to drift, to lose the external perspective and encouragement that help you stay aligned. Building intentional connection might mean joining a peer group, deepening a few select friendships, or seeking out spaces where people are having the kinds of conversations you want to be a part of. It's about creating an ecosystem that supports the life you want to live. Let's bring this down to brass tacks. 3 concrete takeaways you can act on now. First, do a personal audit. Get clear on where you stand in the major domains of your life and identify one area where you want to make a meaningful shift in the next 12 months. Second, define your through line. Write down the consistent theme that's run through your life and brainstorm 3 ways to express it in this season. And third, take one small step toward legacy, whether that's mentoring, contributing to a cause, or starting a project. Choose something you can commit to this month. Small steps compound into lasting impact. If you're watching this or listening to this and you're thinking about reinvention, legacy, or simply getting clarity on what's next, I want to invite you to my free masterclass, Get Unstuck and Move Forward with Confidence. The link is in the description. It's the next best step if you're ready to stop circling the questions and start moving toward answers. Until next time.